As the Krullo slowed with exhaustion from the mad escape, the tempo of the wheel's whining melody unraveled to accentuate the intricacies of the squeals in lower tones. The jostle of the carriage over the worn mountain path clanked the bundled weapons, but also rocked everyone into a comfortable slumber. Cassandra and Rusty had dozed as soon as they could lay their fears to rest on Tarakon's shoulder. Eloise and Darrell were curled on the other side of the cart. Darrell still clutched his short sword, ready to lash at the slightest provocation. The wooded slope was alive with nocturnal chirpings, and the potential fairy threat camouflage therein unnerved Nasu to the point that he could not sleep. He slipped out from under the tarp and took a seat beside Nicken on the driver's box. Nicken kept the lash in his hand through the night. The two watched in silence as the rains waned and the clouds grew sparse. Eventually, starlight could be seen sparkling beyond the canopy. The purple sky began to pale on the horizon. When the first rays of dawn mottled the wispy clouds with pinks and yellows, Nicken passed the whip off to Nasu and curled himself under his robe and under the tarp. The ornamented whistling of songbirds played in the distance around them, growing quiet as the cart's approach, but starting again as soon as it passed. Morning sunlight streamed in ribbons through the canopy, and the backlit foliage made the forest glow yellow and green. Moss flourished in the shaded nooks between the outcropping rocks and across the thin peels of gray bark sloughing off the tree trunks. Vines looped and laced the branches, binding them against the breezes that were still negotiating whether to chill the damp mountain air or let the summer canopy steam. There was a sumptuous contrast between the foliage, glossy with dew, and the mat of the soaked loam. Cassandra marveled at how different it was from the Iman woods, only that it smelled the same, a medicinal bitter broken only when the winds whipped up a sweet floral perfume or a mineral cologne of rainy residues. One by one, eyes opened and marveled at the pleasant morning. The previous night's attack haunted everyone, and to ruin what could be their last beautiful sunrise with idle prattle seemed too much of a risk to take. The essential need of hunger drove the first word, cheerfully delivered. Their supplies were not much, but enough to share a meal of flatbread and a sweet, tangy paste of reduced fruit juices and spices. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows huddled beneath the leaves. Birds had grown louder, and their chorus echoed across the extensive woodland. The drenched tarp hung over the sideboard to drip dry, but only after a precautionary procedure of folding the tarp to pool the rainwater and stirring in the contents from one of Nicken's dismantled grenades. Nasu had expressed confidence that the iron shavings would negate any risk of the glamoured rain marking their trail. The exercise was just another reminder of how much danger they were still in. "Rusty," Cassandra asked when the silence grew too much, "what was that? What happened last night?" Her voice was low. "What did Orkhan do to make the rain stop?" "Was that how he saved us?" Darrell added. Cassandra became conscious that her curiosity was shared. The instigation of conversation brought everyone's attention to the succubus. "It was strange. The rain, the fairies," Eloise chimed. "Yes, all of a sudden the rain stopped and you were sitting on the cart. I did not even know Orkhan was beside me," Cassandra rambled. "Rain may or may not fall, but it will never be anything but rain," Rusty began with a lamentation, but then lifted her gaze to Darrell. "And it is not how Orkhan saved us, but how we saved Orkhan. Your life is filled with moments of growth and learning. You see, listen, taste, and feel the world around you. Some of these moments of learning are so obvious that they seem instantaneous, and other moments of learning only occur after a long meditation on your experience. You are led to have a sense of who you were before you learned, and have a sense of whom you have become now that you have learned. Yet the difference between the two senses of who you are is always but a moment. Like cresting waves of open water, epiphanies happen for only a moment, and then you are back in the trough of existence. Orkhan did not live in that world. Once upon a time, all of his experiences were simultaneous, all of his moments were simultaneous, and all of his decisions were for all time. He lived in a fog of disparate experiences, imagining them, giving each a chance to do what it does. My moment was washing out a stain. it was stubborn. I did not realize how stubborn until Orkhan romanced me with his telling. See, I knew I was being watched. I could feel it. Sometimes I even think I saw his eyes watching me in the bushes. What was for me one moment working on one stain, however, was a scene Orkhan returned to again and again. It was a favorite memory, and he watched me wash out the same stain 1,000,000 times from exponential angles. I washed that spot for lifetimes, just not my own. I don't really remember doing it, but Orkhan said there was nothing more beautiful in the universe than the moment I tucked a fallen lock of hair behind my ear. He was so moved by that moment that he kept an eye out for me in his other dreams. He cooed with my mother when I scraped my knee, and marveled with me at a set of polished bone crochet hooks that I had commissioned as a gift to myself for turning my first major profit as a shepherdess. What our memories for me were for Orkhan displaced moments, and he returned time and again to my scrubbing that stain out in the river and tucking back that errant lock. In the end, Orkhan could not resist his fascination with that singular instance. I lifted my gaze from the stain to see his monstrous form breach the surface of the water. I fell back and was frozen, whether as I was petrified or as a result of Orkhan's talent at manipulating the way rains fall, I could not say. Despite my initial terror at his figure, I was quickly comforted by his tone. He was so innocent and childlike. He could hardly speak without stammering and stuttering. Only later could I understand how hard it was for him to bring a thought from start to an end. His mind had not yet been shackled with the concept of sequence. We talked for what felt like forever. I kept trying to excuse myself, first to finish with the stain, but he helped me do the rest of the laundry, then to get back home. He slung a damp apron upon a branch and begged me to stay just until it was dry. That sounded fair, but the apron never dried. Neither did the sunset. It took time to understand that there was no purpose just then, no weighty schedule to press me on, and we had plenty of time. He convinced me to take a swim with him, and we spent a lifetime together in that water, reflecting in it and refreshing our views of the world. We fell in love, and I was happier than I could imagine. And I stayed there through dinner, and woke after a long sleep curled on his tail. I stayed for ages, and the ripples in the water masked from my reflection just how much my skin had wrinkled. My hair caught the rays of the sun, locked forever at that skewed evening angle, such that I never noticed how gray it grew. Orkhan never changed, so I thought I never changed. Then, when I could no longer stand, I knew we were different. I told Orkhan I would die, and we lamented but carried on. After so much happiness, however, I could regret nothing. I was so happy just lying in his arms, and Orkhan held me until it ended with a gasp that I could not swallow. He held me to him, secure against my own throes, until my muscles and mind surrendered in gratitude. His intervention had won me, but I was not something to be kept. We had lamented my upcoming death, but with unequal understanding of its implications. He mistook it as a human's mundane concern. As soon as it was done, he left that moment to go find me again in another moment. The laundry never made it home. I never turned my first profit, much less solicited those crochet hooks, and now I never would. Orkhan could only find me until the moment at the pool, and his favorite memory was now interrupted by his own intervention. That poor creature, when had there been time to learn that lesson? Orkhan always struggled to explain what happened next. Definitions pour like a waterfall and crush the words before they can be articulated. You have to understand, demons dream of black magic and bring the dreams into fruition. They create the dreams. Orkhan was the patron of time. He gave everything a chance. Orkhan wanted to dream of me. Without me in the dream, Orkhan refused to dream again. Without him, None of the other demons had a chance to do what they do. There were no chances. The creation stopped. The Tawesh, however, would not be denied creation. Orkan began to dream while awake. He was unable to separate his will from the fantasies. He was torn thoughts from dreams, and black magic began to weep and bleed from the fractured seams of his perceptions and understandings. Orkan tantrumed. He rejected the reality that had already been created and positioned himself in contradiction to the will of the Tawesh. The Tawesh, always patient, answered Orkan's tantrum. Is it your place to interrupt the dream? Why did you interrupt her when you should interrupt yourself? Interrupt your own suffering and return to your place in my dream. He could return to the interruption to stop himself and continue to dream of our being apart. He could keep dreaming and never dream of me again. Either way, his suffering was due to us being separated from one another. I was human, a figment of his imagination, a figment with a limited lifetime. With the seams between dream and reality rent, however, he could imagine an interruption to his own suffering. He did not have to dream of me as human. He could interrupt the moment when he fell in love with me as I was, and dream of me as something else. That was the moment the cuffs broke. He was no longer a slave to the dreams of the Tawesh. I was. Rusty turned her wrist to bear a chain bracelet crocheted from a thin golden wire, and Orkan became a figment of my dreams. What you saw was but a moment in the dream where you saved Cassandra, and she saved Orkan by breaking his cuffs. By the Tawesh, Cassandra's words leaked from her breath. I broke Orkan's cuffs. I separated him from his enslavement. That is why Orkan had waited so long to hear the sound of his cuffs breaking. That was the moment Orkan and I were bound to one another. But you've been together for so long. The moments of creation are all jumbled. They are only now playing out in sequence. Control was slipping from Cassandra's mind. I found a book. The charm was written in it. Nesu peered over his shoulder from the driver's bench, studying her over the curve of his cheek. That was no act of mine. That was black magic. If that was black magic, though, then how can I or any other claim the power of black magic, bend the will of the Tawesh to change? I have never understood that, Rusty said. A quiet sickness filled Cassandra's heart. She curled back against a corner furthest from the succubus. This story sounds familiar, Terracon said. I know it, or something like it. Are you saying that you are Maiden Drabolta? Yes, there is a telling where they use that name. Cassandra looked up from her sullen corner to Terracon. You mean that human fable from your book? A Draboltan kiss? Yes, it is one of my favorites, Terracon confirmed. The compassion of black magic granted lovers eternal happiness. All they had to do was believe and submit. Cassandra was ashamed she had not picked up on it earlier. It was one of her favorite stories as well. The reason she ran to the pool in the Iman Woods.